Jambo, habari, I'm Professor Graeme Yorston, and today I'm going to be talking about a bizarre outbreak of uncontrollable laughing that closed down several schools in the newly independent country of Tanganyika in the early 1960s. I find the history of Tanzania fascinating as I worked for an oil exploration company there for several months in the 1980s. Yes, that's me. In the 19th century, the whole region was controlled by the Sultan of Zanzibar and was the centre for the East African slave trade, which resulted in the enslavement of over 1 million local people. From the 1880s onwards, the German Empire muscled in, but not without significant local resistance, and an uprising in 1905, known as the Maji Maji Rebellion, in which African warriors attacked German machine guns, believing that they would be invulnerable because their magic war medicine would turn the German bullets to water. It didn't, and as many as 300,000 Africans died, compared to only 15 Germans. After the First World War, German East Africa was divided up by the League of Nations. Parts were given to Belgium and Portugal, but the largest part, Tanganyika, was given to Britain to administer as a mandated territory. It gained independence in December 1961 and joined with Zanzibar in 1964 to form the modern nation of Tanzania. The Tanganyikan laughter epidemic was an outbreak of mass hysteria, also known as mass psychogenic illness, reflecting the idea that the cause is psychological rather than physical. It began in the village of Kashasha on Lake Victoria in January 1962. Those affected would start laughing uncontrollably and be unable to stop. Many also had breathing problems, fainting fits, headaches, or skin rashes. Attacks were accompanied by restlessness and occasionally violence if attempts were made to restrain them. Subjects might say that things were moving around in their heads, or that they were afraid that someone was running after them. The outbreak started at a mission-run boarding school for girls aged 12 to 18, initially in 3 girls, but it spread rapidly throughout the school, affecting 2/3 of the 159 pupils in different dormitories. The teaching staff were unaffected, but reported that students were unable to concentrate on their lessons, so after 6 weeks, the school was closed. The epidemic then spread to another village 80 miles away, where several of the girls lived. Over 200, mostly young villagers, developed the same uncontrollable laughing attacks and other symptoms. The Kashasha school opened in May, but had to close again at the end of June as many of those affected had a recurrence of their symptoms. It was not unusual for subjects to have up to 4 episodes, each lasting from a few hours to 16 days, with periods of normality in between. Over the next few months, the laughing epidemic spread to 4 other schools, including one over the border in Uganda, affecting both boys and girls, and there were isolated outbreaks in villages and in the families of those affected as well. In Tanzania, madness was considered an incurable curse, and people with mental illness were feared and rejected. The unexplained illness therefore aroused great interest in the local town. Some believed that the madness was the result of the atmosphere having been poisoned by atomic bomb explosions. Others that the maize flour used in schools had been poisoned. The authorities carried out extensive medical tests and investigations to try to identify and isolate a cause. By the time it died out, 18 months later, 14 schools had been closed and over 1,000 people, both children and adults, had been affected. It ended as mysteriously as it began. There were no lasting effects, but teachers said that for several weeks after recovering, pupils were unable to attend to their lessons. 2 other outbreaks of mass psychogenic illness occurred in the region over the next 2 years, not of laughing, but of uncontrollable violent running in boys' schools. Those affected would have a sudden onset of agitation, talkativeness and aggression. They would run about aimlessly saying they were responding to commands from the spirits of dead ancestors. In Zambia, a few years later, a similar outbreak in a school affected over 100 pupils and aroused such fear that a witch finder was summoned who declared that the cause was contaminated food. After which, students went on a rampage, damaging property and setting fire to the cook's house. Despite this, some published accounts of the epidemic make out that it was all jolly good fun. 1 or 2 pupils began to giggle. The giggling gathered pace and soon the whole class was merry. Teachers were tickled by this spontaneous, joyful outburst and joined in. Soon the whole school was swimming in a tide of laughter. Word spread to the village, and when mothers came to collect their children, they too became dizzy with laughter and chuckles of delight. Utter nonsense. The early descriptions of this and other epidemics by Western-trained psychiatrists have been criticised by later post-colonial theorists on the grounds that they reflect superior attitudes and don't take account of local societal issues. It is true that in the first half of the century, discussions about mental illness in the continent still reflected imperialist thinking. including phrases such as, "The African seldom uses his cortex." But the paper describing the Tanganyikan epidemic actually seems to be very sensitive to the local cultural issues, and suggests that the outbreak occurred as a result of cultural dissonance of students in missionary schools being caught between the strict traditional belief systems of their family and village elders and new ideas challenging those beliefs in school. So, the East African laughing epidemic was mass hysteria, a release of tension at a time of change, something that has probably occurred in all human societies throughout history. I guess time will tell whether for the last 2 years we have been living through the biggest ever outbreak of mass hysteria. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and click the notifications bell if you want to be kept up to date with all the latest videos. Kwaheri, see you next time.